This is section 2 of the Fight for Equal Rights notes. Section 2 is the women's rights movement. The women's rights movement in the 60s and 70s is often referred to as the second wave of feminism. Feminism, just to define it for you, it's a commonly misunderstood word. I think it's the theory that political, social, and economic equality for men and women should be what we're striving for. So feminism is not an idea that women should be held at held above men or anything like that, or that women should have an advantage over men. It's actually fighting for just equality, being on the same level, and everyone having the same opportunities, whether it be politics, social opportunities, economic opportunities, job opportunities, fill in the blank. This was the second wave. First wave was in the 1920s. We talked about that. When women won the right to vote with the 19th Amendment, if you don't remember. I know I ask you all the time, but it's important that you know that one. The civil rights struggle prompted women to look at the ways in which society judged and discriminated against them as a group. Women are considered a minority group for most of history, and you can make the argument that that still applies today. And minority doesn't always mean that there's less of a population. It just can mean that they have less rights than part of the population. And for most of history in the United States, women did have less rights than men. And then throughout history, they've gained a more equal standing. The Civil Rights Movement, we said that right, excuse me. It also brought black and white women together. Civil Rights Movement both inspired women to demand gender equality and taught them ways in which they could get it. Women wanted to redefine how they're viewed, objecting, for example, to the housewife stereotype. Betty Friedan, I've got a picture of her on the next page, a picture of her book as well, powerfully articulated this message in her book, The Feminine Mystique. While women in the workforce grew tremendously in the 1950s and 60s, and we talked about that with the 50s, kind of started talking about women doing different jobs when we were going over World War II. Despite the stereotypes, many women still found themselves in dead-end jobs, despite their education, despite the qualifications being the same as men. It was inconsistent hiring, inconsistent promotions, inconsistent pay. So we're going to kind of look at how some of that was approached. Several years after she wrote The Feminine Mystique, there's a picture of her down there, Betty Friedan helped establish the National Organization for Women. Organization dedicated itself to gaining true equality for women and equal partnership for the sexes. They also set out to break down barriers, specifically in the workplace and in education. The National Organization for Women are now attacked stereotypes of women and called for more equal balance in roles in marriage. That's something that has caught on. I believe it just kind of depends on a little bit on where you live in the country. It can depend a little bit on how you were raised, what your faith is a little bit. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to. I don't like to give hard and fast answers because I don't think that's accurate for everyone. So, but it's just something to think about. Now had two major priorities. This will be a question. I believe this will be a question in the back of your notes here, so pay attention to this slide. The first was to bring about the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, or the ERA. This amendment originally proposed in the 20s, so this is definitely the second wave of the women's rights movement, because some of these things that they're trying to get passed in the 60s, they've been on their mind for 40 years now. Would guarantee gender equality under the law. It seems like a simple law to get passed, but you would be surprised how much opposition that faced. talk some more about it. The second of their goals or major priorities was to protect reproductive rights, especially the right to an abortion. We'll talk about this some more a little bit later on in this class, and some recent history has kind of changed the way we look at this one as well. So this second bullet point here is a very hot topic, and it's been a hot topic for decades in this country and around the world a little as well. So keep that one in mind as well. But that'll be a question on some of your homework. For some women now, it was seen too extreme. For others, it didn't seem extreme enough, but it was a rallying point to promote equality for women. Some radical feminists were among those who found now too tame and sought a more fundamental way to restructure society, find a way to show how society had trapped women into adopting restrictive roles. There were public protests of the Miss America pageant. There were those who sought to make all personal issues political. And then you've got Gloria Steinem. Gloria Steinem, this picture of her in the top right corner. There she's getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Barack Obama. It's one of the highest awards you can get as a citizen in the United States. We've had several get it. You have to do some really great social work to get that. Upon graduating from college, Gloria Steinem worked as a freelance writer. Spent time as an undercover writer, an assignment at a club run by Playboy magazine, and she was doing that to reveal the working conditions and humiliation that women who worked there had to go through just to make a living. While society viewed the women that worked there as having an easy or glamorous life. She was also the co-founder of Miss Magazine, or MS Magazine, there on the right. Both men and women openly challenged and opposed openly opposed and challenged the women's movement. So I don't want you to think the opposition to the women's movement in the 60s was only by men. There were plenty of women that were opposed to it as well. So not all women were in favor of the women's movement. Phyllis Schlafly there's a picture of her there on the right of the slide. It's not the best picture in the world. I've got some I'll show you later. She's a conservative political activist, denounced women's liberation, calling it a total assault on family, marriage, and children. Believed that it would end, or possibly cause an end to traditional family life in the United States and change gender roles forever and possibly in a negative way. She most notably fought hard against the Equal Rights Amendment, and you can see her there. She's got a shirt on with a stop sign, and it says "Stop the ERA" or "Stop that amendment that made equality for men and women under the law of the land." She claimed that the Equal Rights Amendment compelled women to fight in the military, and that would hurt the family. And she said it would also end sex-segregated bathrooms, so separate bathrooms for men and women. The Equal Rights Amendment was defeated. It did not go through. It fell just 3 states short, and she is credited with swaying conservative states to vote against it. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, we talked about that a little while ago when we were going over the Civil Rights Movement, and I told you it was a big one, and that you needed to remember it because it's one of those laws that's constantly drawn back on to use as precedent in future cases. But Title VII of the Act outlawed discrimination on the basis of sex. So this clause was initially introduced by opponents of the Act because they believed that Title VII was so extreme that the Civil Rights Act would never get passed in the first place. And we talked about how hard some conservative senators worked to prevent the Civil Rights Act of 64 from getting passed when they filibustered for 80 days to try to prevent it. But it did get passed. The bill also set up the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to enforce the federal prohibition on job discrimination. So it says that you cannot be discriminated against from having a job or from being hired or considered for a job under this law. Enforcing Title VII was difficult, to say the least, and the National Organization for Women and other feminist groups filed countless lawsuits against employers who refused to hire women. So President Kennedy, and to pay them fairly, that was a big one, and that's still an issue. Both those things can still be issues. President Kennedy also established the Commission on the Status of Women in 1961 to examine workplace discrimination. Title IX, you've probably heard of that one, of the Higher Education Act in 1972. So we are getting into the 70s now. I'm just kind of expanding on the women's rights movement. Banned discrimination in education. So this has most notably been used to enforce, or used to enforce rather, in athletics, in high school athletics, but also specifically in the NCAA. I don't know if you remember a few years ago during March Madness. I think this was during COVID, I believe. The women's and men's March Madness happened at the same time. And one of the women's players, I don't remember for which team, was filming the setup that they had and some of the things that they were getting in this tournament. And, you know, it was like the weight room had like 10 dumbbells and like a yoga mat. And then the boys players, you know, were obviously sharing on their social media how nice everything was, and their hotels and the food that's being provided to them, and their swag bags with like their, you know, free shirts and stuff that says they've made it to March Madness, and their weight rooms and all the things, and it blew up, and people were crying Title IX, and they were right. It was a big miss by the NCAA. So this is something that still is not perfect, you know, and things. I think I mentioned this the other day. If you're not constantly holding things accountable, you know, it's not going to be perfect. So this is something that gets brought up still a lot today. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974 made it illegal to deny credit to a woman just because of her gender. We'll talk about that some more later. And then Roe versus Wade in 1973 assured women the right to a legal abortion. As you know, that's recently been overturned. This is something we'll talk about some more in the next section of notes. But obviously, which you're probably aware of this because it's pretty recent news, that was a highly controversial decision, and the decision to overturn it was highly controversial. It's going to be a controversial one either way. The workplace did slowly start to change. Today, it reflects the subtle shift in attitudes about women and men. A percentage of women in the workforce has grown from 30% in 1950 to 60% in 2000. The number of married female workers has also increased, meaning just because you're married doesn't mean that you can't have a career. You know, my mother has a career. She's married. Several of you, have experienced that with your own parents, maybe your different family members or friends or whatever, so you're aware of that. Fields often restricted and closed off women have opened up as well, such as accounting, law, medicine, the military, police force, different things like that typically would have been something women couldn't have done. Despite these gains, the average woman still earns less than the average man, partly because women continue to work in fields that pay less and they're promoted less. Many studies suggest a glass ceiling. What that means is there is a top, they're saying, to how high women can actually go, but it's giving the appearance that there's not. So that's something we can talk some more about. The United States has also seen a feminization of poverty in the last 30 or 40 years. Majority of the nation's poorest women are single women and single mothers. All right, so this is just a timeline on the left side of the screen there. You can look through that, and then just some of the more notable women that you've probably heard of, in recent history. With Madeleine Albright, and I say more notable women just in American politics. I should be clear on that. Madeleine Albright and Hillary Clinton, and then the first female Vice President, Kamala Harris. Alright, that is the end of section 2. Here are your questions for that section. Make sure you work on those, and we'll pick back up with section 3.